of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The time is 6:30. I'm just making sure our audio is good, because it sounded like it didn't catch in. The time is 6:30. The date is February the 3rd, and I'm going to call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals to order. That is the first item of business. The second item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand with me for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, very good. With that, actually, I should mention before we go on to other orders of business, we are still holding over with officers from last year. We will maintain our existing officer set until the officer elections, which is later on in the agenda, assuming the agenda gets passed. But in the meantime, we're going to maintain our existing officers. And with that, moving on to item 3, which is the roll call. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
So do, Mr. Chairman. Member DeCoster?
Here.
Member DeBruin?
Here.
Chairman Tuckfield?
Here.
Member Piper?
Here.
And Member Slauson is present.
Very good. That's all members present. And as a note for the record, those are all of the, not even sure what we're calling ourselves. I would suppose the regular members and none of the alternate members, which is a note for the purposes of quorum. That being said, we're going to move on to item 4, which is addressing any conflicts of interest. Ms. Lawson's going to call the roll. If at that time, if you have any items on tonight's agenda with which you have a conflict of interest, please signify by saying yes, and if you do not, please signify by saying no. Ms. Lawson, please call the roll.
Okay, starting with Member Piper?
No.
Chairman Tuckfield?
No.
Member DeBruin?
No.
Member DeCoster?
No.
And Member Slauson, no.
All right, having stated any conflicts of interest, which there were none this evening, we will move on to item 5, which is the approval of tonight's agenda. Is there any motions on tonight's agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Support? Oh.
Motion by Mr. Piper, supported by Mr. DeBruin. Is there, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed by saying nay. That motion passes. Item 6 is the approval of the previous meeting minutes. These are those from December the 5th, which is a regularly scheduled meeting. Is there any comments or motions?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. DeBruin to approve. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. DeCoster. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. That motion passes, and those minutes are approved. I should note for the record, those were as read, I assume, Mr. DeBruin?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. That moves us on to old business. I don't believe we have any old business this evening, Mr. Box. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Very good. And then we'll move on to new business. The first item on new business this evening is a variance request from the zoning ordinance, section 10.2404B. This is a request to modify a previous variance for a panel masonry wall. Permanent parcel is 0822400023, and EIG 14T KCE2, Michigan Macomb LLC is the petitioner. Mr. Box, could you take us through the department's reviews and stance on this, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board. So there's actually kind of a couple questions here. First and foremost, I think you all probably remember that they've been before you a couple times now. So I think first we need to determine if this is a variance that's needed, or if what was approved last time will allow what they're seeking. And if it's determined that what they're seeking is not allowed by the previous variance, then they would be seeking the modification of that variance. So again, you mentioned it is for the KinderCare facility on the corner of 22 Mile and Card Road. It is zoned office. They've already been through the special land use and site plan approval process, again, as well as getting the variance for the wall in December of 2019. So what you see on the screen there, that's what's in the ordinance right now about a masonry wall. They did get that variance. Again, this was before I was with the township, but I know it had something to do with the easement of the consumer's right-of-way or consumer's easement adjacent to the property, of not being able to put in a continuous footing. So a panel wall system hung on concrete pillars without the continuous foundation is what was approved. So they did, in their letter that you should have received in your packet, indicate that they feel what they're seeking now is consistent with what you are already approved. Our staff determined that it was not consistent, and we based that on this image here. So this was in the original application packet, which shows the panel wall that they were seeking to use at that time. Those are one solid panel, not multiple slats of panels to fill up the space. For that reason, we deemed that what they're seeking would need to be a new variance or a modification of the existing variance. I did put the meeting minutes from December of 2019 in front of you for your review. I think Mr. Loya has a copy as well. So I guess at this point, looking at what they're seeking, which is the smaller panels or slats to modify the wall or to fill in the wall, I think we should determine before anything else whether or not what was already approved covers this wall, or do they need to modify that variance?
Very good. Mr. Box, I should mention before we go further, I think when I was calling for minutes, I glanced at these and I called out the date. So it's possible that our motion earlier on the minutes was incorrect as far as the date that I stated. So I just note for the record that the motion earlier was for the date of the last regularly scheduled meeting. It might not necessarily be December 5th, which I believe is what I called out. Probably was January.
I think you're correct. Yeah, January 3rd, I believe.
January 3rd. So as long as Mr. Bruin's okay with that.
Absolutely.
Mr. Aloy, is that okay just to note it that way?
Yes.
Okay, very good. That being said, is there any questions for Mr. Box on this issue? Mr. Box, do you want us to, so procedurally, and Mr. Loy, feel free to chime in on this. So we're taking this as two items. Do we have, I would assume that we have to vote whether or not on a interpretation of our own variance? Is that kind of what we're being looked at to do here?
I think that they are seeking a modification of their variance based on the department's determination that this is different than what the original variance was. So I think that your vote is really either to one, decide to modify or grant their modification or deny that, or two, if not, then deem that this would comply with it and that no variance is needed. And so that would be an interpretation.
Would we do it in that order?
I think you can do it whichever order you wish. I just, though, in my mind, I thought that would be more organized, but, you know, certainly it's up to the board and its discretion how to handle it.
I'm fine with with what you feel would be correct. It's not a situation I've encountered before. Usually if we have an interpretation, it's an interpretation of the ordinance, not one of our own variances, or at least that's been my experience.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess in the way I prepared these slides, I guess I was assuming that you would make a determination on the original variance first. I do have a few more slides. If needed, if you feel that what was already granted would allow this wall, then I think that this motion is, you know, if you agree with that, we're done. If not, then I do have a few more slides. So I guess I'll leave that up to you guys if you want me to go through those slides now, or do you want to make that determination first?
Mr. Loy, obviously, do you have a problem with doing it? Maybe one might be more organized. Do you think it's better to do one or worse? I'm trying to make sure we balance. We have maybe two different thoughts here.
I'm open to whatever process you think is correct. I mean, you know, this is really a function as you are a zoning board of appeals, so I know it's unusual for you to be in this deciding these things. It's usually variances and whatnot, but I think it's up to you, whichever way you want to take it.
All right. I would say I think I would agree with Mr. Box in this case, and that I would like to take on the question of whether or not our last variance was covered this particular issue, and then proceed on from that point. That being said, Mr. Box, I know we have this here, but is it possible for you to read the language of the variance request? I can read it too. I just want to make sure it's on the
From the previous minutes?
Yeah.
So that what the motion states is that now therefore be it resolved, the action of the board is to grant the requested variance of section 10.0344 to allow for a 6-foot high hung panel concrete wall or a 6-foot-high poured concrete masonry wall with a continuous foundation is required.
Okay, very good. That being said, I think I should bring up the petitioners. If you could come forward, state your name and address for the record, and give any comments with regards to the previous variance. I think we're going to take it in two parts here.
Very good, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Board of Appeals members. My name is Mark Kellenberger. I'm with 814 Development. This is Mark Steck, also with 814 Development. We did plan to have Joe Hollowell from Duracrete here. Unfortunately, his wife's car broke down. He's getting kids. Just sent a note, and he won't be able to make it. Thank you again for the opportunity. What we have in front of you, when we were back in 2019, as you stated, the Consumers Energy easement created a situation where we couldn't do a continuous foundation. They wouldn't allow a concrete wall in their easement. So we went to them, asked them for permission to do a hung panel wall, basically post-hole type foundations with hung panels. They gave us a letter to that, came before the ZBA, and you were gracious enough to grant that. At that time, we hadn't had experience with the hung panel wall system. We had done some research. We found the American Concrete Products, I think, and chose their product to put in front of you just as a demonstration of the hung paneled wall system. So we had provided that. In hindsight, maybe we should have looked further or deeper. So fast forward to now, we're under construction. The contractor had come to us and said, hey, I have a relationship with this Duracrete, similar product. It's engineered drawings, much more structurally sound. It's actually, he's got, I think they were provided signed and sealed engineered drawings that go along with this. His reinforced bar system is a much more stable system. So we were interested in that, approached the township. They suggested that we come before the ZBA. So what we have is, instead of this panel being one continuous panel that would be the height of the wall, 6 feet, it comes in sections that are slid into the channelized columns and lowered down in place. From an appearance standpoint, I think you have some photos of the panelized system that has been used at the Detroit Edison substation, Ogun County International Airport. Both very nice systems. We visited them. It's a solid wall. From an appearance standpoint, it's actually textured a little bit nicer in some of those situations. From a functionality standpoint, it's a solid wall. There is, from a sound deadening standpoint and the visibility, there won't be, there's no gap in those panels. There won't be sound that can travel through. The visibility, it's a solid panel, no different than if it were all one section of a panel. In discussing this with the township consultant initially, he had indicated that the township had some experience with a similar system that they were not fond of and had some issues with. We visited that site. We contacted Duracrete and had conversations and said, hey, help us understand this. That location and that system, while similar, is not the same. I think part of the failure there is workmanship and just how they installed that, or the lack of installation with the post-hole foundations. And also the system itself is not a reinforced system, again, with engineered drawings. And I really wish Joe was here because from a presentation standpoint, he is very familiar and very confident in his product. When we took him to the site and started to discuss the reasons for the township's concern, he went off on a pretty good monologue about the differences between his product and this, the workmanship, and just the quality differences from that standpoint. So I do wish he was here, but all in all, we're asking for this sectional wall to be allowed. It'll provide the same function as a panelized system, soundproof, or same sound barrier, same visibility. We feel it's a very similar, durable, structurally sound, better product than what we had actually presented previously. So we would hope for your consideration on that, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and again, I apologize for Joe's absence.
Very good. And I did just want to follow up with one thing, and I was pulling up the minutes here, so you might have mentioned this at the very beginning, and I might have missed it, so if I did, my apologies. But the reasoning for wanting to move from one to the other was principally the relationship with the contractor.
Relationship, the availability, price-wise, it's similar. Really, this system is available. They know each other. He's used the product. When he presented it, I'm very familiar with the Oakland County International Airport, so I had actually seen that in function, and so went back out to look at it, and it's a very nice system. And so we thought that there would be really no objection or no issue with that, so we pursued that.
And understood. And then with regards to obviously the wording in our minutes is a 6-foot-high hung panel wall. Obviously, you did have some examples in the drawing, and not speaking to whether or not the sectional panel is correct or not, but specifically whether this is covered under our original variance. What's your thought as to the wording and the drawings versus what we approved?
Yeah, so we had actually internally had that debate quite a bit. One, in preparation to bring it to the township, and then again, preparing for this evening's meeting. We feel that it's very similar from the standpoint that the hung paneled system, that is exactly what this is. It's smaller sections of panels. The function is the same. Again, it's not a single panel, but it is a collection of panels stacked on top of each other that perform the same benefits or the same attributes as a single solid panel would. Again, the workmanship piece, there's no opportunity for that to have an issue. If you had a workmanship issue with a single panel, you would have a very similar situation. If the foundations aren't installed correctly below the frost line and those start to heave, you would have the same situation as what you have on that other site. So we feel that under that same ordinance or that same variance, that would allow this system. It's channelized columns, channelized pillars with a hung paneled system. It's just sectional.
All right, very good. Thank you,
Thank
sir. Any other questions from the board?
Real quick, you said that the contractor for this system that you wish to use had determined that it was workmanship that was a problem. I just wondered what that process was.
So, in visiting the site, like I say, he went off on a little bit of a tangent. He was apparently very familiar with it because his product has been compared to that in other situations. He emphasized that neither that company nor the company that installed that product is no longer in business. Upon his inspection, again, looking at and I wish he was here to discuss and it's probably in this detail, the epoxy coated rebar system that he comes back to, and the lengths that he's went through to get the engineering seals on this from a structural perspective, is what has distinguished his system or the Duracrete system from this other panelized section.
I was just curious what the process was because, to say that his is going to be better and the same thing won't happen with
Sure.
this. So.
Yeah, and I guess just to expand on that, if again, to the point that if this is not installed correctly, you would have a similar type situation. And again, from an enforcement standpoint, it would come back to a property maintenance type issue, no different that if you had a vinyl fence or a wood fence and panels had been removed or had fallen in disrepair, you know, you would have that ability to enforce that from a property maintenance or a code standpoint based on the approved site plan of providing that wall. So we feel that the township would have some safety in that as well. But again, we're very confident in our contractor. We're very comfortable with the product. We're not here to do that twice. It's costly enough to do it once. So it's on us to do everything and execute. So we believe that will be the case and don't see any future issue with this.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have two questions.
Go ahead, Mr.
I have
Brewer.
two questions. One for the petitioner. With regard to the posts that hold this up,
Yep.
there is no difference between the posts or the foundation of the posts that hold up this system as opposed to the system with the solid panel, or are they identical or different?
They would be they're different companies, but they would be identical, yes.
Okay.
Yes, channelized,
Right.
I-beam type system, yes.
And then my other question, I think, would be for Mr. Box. We do have a blight standard, or so if this type of structure or the prior structure with a solid piece, if either one of them fell into disrepair, and he touched on a little bit, we would have a method for enforcement to make sure that it looks good, right?
We do. We have code enforcement that can go out there and give them notifications or fines, tickets. Obviously, we have a lot more pressing issues than fining people for their walls, and it's not something that code enforcement would typically get to quickly. It wouldn't come to the top of their list usually. So that was part of our concern with this was, you know, if something did go wrong with the wall, it might be there for a while until we even notice it. And then by the time we notify them, how long is it going to take them to repair? So.
Very good.
Any other questions?
I have a couple comments and I guess no questions, but
Go ahead, Mr. Coster.
obviously respect the professional staff's opinion. That being said, I remember the meeting. I made a comment at the meeting regarding this product. So my intent at that meeting was this actual system. I think I stated there at that point, in the community where I work, there's 2 applications of this. They've been around for years, and we haven't had any problems. So I'm not endorsing this system at all. But it was my intent back a couple years ago that this was the system they were going to install. So, like I said, why I respect the opinions of other staff. At that time, this was my selection, so I don't think I'll be changing from that. But I just want to get that out there.
I think I can add, I remember that discussion that it was going to be individual panels, actually. I do remember that.
All right, so the question before us is with regards to, I should ask, Mr. Loya, comments. We have one item on the agenda. This is technically not the item on the agenda, actually. Well, actually, maybe it would be. Request to modify previous variance. I assume it'd be appropriate for me to ask for public comment. If we have 2 questions, do we ask for public comment for both? Do we ask for one? How should I?
I think you can ask for public comment on this agenda item and in this motion.
Okay.
If the motion is denied and or it doesn't pass and there's a second motion, I think you can do that within the same confines of the same hearing. So we're discussing both issues now. I think the public comment would address
Be for
both.
both issues. Okay. That being said, and without any further ado, I'm going to open up public comment. If any members of the public wish to comment, please come forth to the podium, state your name and address for the record. And per what we're discussing, what I just asked Mr. Loya, obviously we only have 2 members of the public here. We are looking at 2 issues, whether or not this is covered by the, potentially 2 issues, whether this was covered by the initial motion and if we, initial variance, and if we decide that it was not, then whether or not we should grant an adjusted or amended variance for it. So, I think based on what Mr. Loya said, we would take on potentially both of those questions after this, so if you wanted to address either one, please feel free to come forward and state your name and address and any comments.
Hello, my name's Steve Pittman. My address is 49101 Card. I'm right next to KinderCare, just north of it. I'm good with that. I mean, I thought they were gonna go with the individual slats like that, the last meeting that I attended. And either panel, I'm good with whatever one they wanna use.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Pittman.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Very good. That being said, I'm going to close the public portion and bring it back to the board. For any comments or motions, and I think that any initial motion based on our discussion would be either yes, our initial variance request included this, or no, it did not.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make the motion that I think, based on my recollection, our initial variance was to have individual panels on there, so I would make a motion to say that it is covered by the variance that we granted back in December of 2019.
Okay, very good. Motion by Mr. Piper. Is there any support?
I'll support that.
Supported by Mr. DeCoster. I'm going to, well, I should check, just make sure, is there any discussion on the motion?
I want to be clear on the motion. We're saying that because I wasn't here for that meeting, your variance that you granted in December, on December 5th of 19 would,
Allow this.
okay, I'm clear.
That-
Okay, that being said, motion by Mr. Piper, supported by Mr. DeCoster. I think we're gonna do a roll call on this one. Ms. Lawson, please call the roll.
Okay. Starting with Member Piper,
Yes.
Member DeCoster,
Yes.
Member DeBruin,
Yes.
Chairman Tuckfield,
No.
Member Slauson, yes.
All right, very good. That motion passed 4-1. Gentlemen, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone is able to drive safe this evening. Thanks.
Hopefully. Thank you.
All right, that moves us on to item 8B, which is the election, and I should verify actually, Mr. Webb, we shouldn't need to do anything further after that. We determined that the original variance request covered this, and there should be nothing.
Did a great job.
I appreciate it. Wasn't looking for that, but just wanted to make sure.
You're all set.
Okay, just want to make sure we hadn't dotted an I there. Okay, on to item 8B. This would be election of officers. We have 3 positions open. That'd be the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary. Typically, what we'll do here is someone will nominate for a position. I believe someone has to support the nomination. I then close nominations for the position, and we vote on any nominations that happen. So with that being said, I will entertain motions for, nominations rather, for secretary.
I would like to nominate Dawn Slauson to continue as secretary.
Okay. Nomination by Mr. Piper. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. DeCoster. Any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, I'm going to close the nominations, and I'm going to bring it to a vote. There was a nomination for Ms. Lawson as secretary. All those in favor for Ms. Lawson say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. I was waiting for you to say nay, Dawn. And with that said, Ms. Lawson is reappointed as the secretary. I'm going to open up nominations for vice chair. Is there any nominations for vice chair?
Nominate Mr. DeCoster.
Nomination for Mr. DeCoster. Is there support?
I'll support that.
Supported by Mr. Piper. I think we may have this in the bylaws. Hopefully, I'm not going too far out of our path. I didn't read them before I came this evening. Any other nominations? Hearing none, I'm going to close the nominations and bring it to a vote. We have a vote on Mr. DeCoster as vice chair, to be nominated as vice chair. Actually, appointed as vice chair, would be correct. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. Mr. DeCoster has been reappointed as vice chair. I'm going to open up nominations for chair. Are there any nominations in this case?
I make a motion for Chairman Tuckfield to remain as our chairman.
All right, nomination by Ms. Lawson. Is there support?
I'll support that.
Supported by Mr. Piper. Is there any further nominations? Hearing no further nominations, I'm going to close the nominations and bring it to a vote. The vote will be for nominating Mr. Tuckfield as chair. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. I did abstain. I should have probably let people do that earlier. I didn't do a roll call vote, and I appreciate the support. All right, congratulations, Ms. Lawson and Mr. DeCoster. And on to public comments, item 9. I don't think we technically have any public in the audience. We do have one person, but I think he's more on the staff end. But if anybody from the public would like to speak, please come forward with any comments. Seeing none, I'm going to move on to ZBA member comments. Any comments from members this evening?
Just glad everybody got here safe with the roads.
It is a good thing. Yeah, just appreciate reappointment as chair. As I think I've said before, I'm happy to pass it on, particularly as opposed to maybe the planning commission where there's a little more continuity. I think generally it's good to pass some of these positions around, make sure everybody's comfortable with it. And I think we'll try again this year as we have in the past to make sure Mr. DeCoster runs at least one meeting. I think it's good for everybody to get practice at it. So
Just don't give them a controversial one.
I think we did this time, didn't we? I forget. Which meeting did you end up chairing?
I forget.
It wasn't the Meyer one. I know that. It wasn't. All right. Moving on to planning director comments. Mr. Box, anything for us this evening?
The only thing I would say is that at this point, it looks like there will not be a meeting in March. No agenda items. So,
And that would, they would have for the next week, or how long would be till that's set?
a few more days,
Few more
I would
days.
say. Yeah.
Okay.
When will we know whether or not for certain that there is or is not? Or are we just assuming there is not?
I would say I'm 99% certain.
Okay,
They technically could submit something in the next day or two. If we got reviews done in time, we might have enough time to advertise, but the 15-day advertisement period in the newspaper requires us to get it to them 7 days before that. So that really pushes it out quite a ways. So.
okay, okay.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Box?
Nope.
All right. Mr. Van Tiffelen, I know you're in your audience, but anything for us this evening? Okay. Mr. Loya, anything you want to pass on?
No, just great job tonight.
Appreciate it. You're hired. All right. We'll move on to item 12, which is adjournment. The time is 7 o'clock. Is there a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Ms. Lawson. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Piper. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. At 7:01, we stand adjourned.